Welcome to Saturday Morning Classics. We are currently reading The Island by T.M. Wright, and this week we're starting with Chapter 16. So grab a cup of coffee, sit down, relax, and listen to the story. Chapter 16. When Arnaud got to the firehouse in Eagle Bay, there were 4 men playing cards. His daughter, Mary, was there too. She was tall, lithe, blonde, with a strong, square face. He hugged her, said, "Hello, daughter," then turned to the men playing cards. "I need your help," he said. "I have lost a man in the snow." 2 of them, Tom Lord and Manny Kent, had had dealings with Arnaud and were accustomed to his way of speaking. The other 2 men looked at each other and smiled. Arnaud said to Tom Lord, "A man fell from my jeep into the snow, and I have lost him." Tom Lord, a big bearish man of 45 with a full beard and long dark hair, nodded and stood. "I'll get my coat," he said, and went into a side room of the firehouse. Manny Kent placed his cards flat on the table. "We gotta call in the sheriff, I guess," he said, went to the wall phone nearby and dialed the operator. He waited. He got nothing. He pressed the shutoff with his finger, dialed the operator again. He cursed, hung up. "I'm going to use the phone across the street," he said, and left the firehouse. One of the 2 men still playing cards said to Arnaud, "Where do you lose this guy?" Mary said, "Did you really lose someone out there, Dad?" Arnaud nodded. "Yes, a man staying at the inn. His name is Walt Roman, and he fell through the door of the jeep into the snow and is lost." "Wow," said one of the men playing cards. "Didn't you go looking for him?" "Yes, I did, quite naturally, but his escape was more into the densest of darkness, and there is more snow now than elephants." Manny Kent reappeared. "Sheriff says he'll follow us." "Yes, of course," said Arnaud. Amy Glynn, in her room at Many Pines, gently nudged her husband. "Wake up, there's someone at the door." He grumbled something she couldn't understand, then pulled the blanket over his head. She nudged him again, less gently. "Wake up, damn it!" He sighed. "What do you want?" "There's someone at the door." He listened a few moments. "I don't hear anything." "They haven't knocked yet, Jeff. Whoever it is hasn't knocked yet." Jeff stuck his head out from under the blanket and looked toward the door. There was a long sliver of white light showing beneath it. "What the hell are you talking about, Amy? There's no one there." "Jeff!" Samantha, in the bassinet near the bed, let out 2 short cries. Amy looked at her, though she could see little in the darkness. Jeff said, "Is she all right?" "Yes," Amy answered. "She does that. All babies do. If you took any real interest in her—" "Quiet," Jeff said. He saw that the sliver of white light at the bottom of the door was broken at the center now, and he called, "Who's there?" There was a knock. "Who's there?" Another knock. "It's Lynette Meyer. I gotta talk to you. You gotta listen." "Do you know what time it is?" Jeff called. He checked the alarm clock on the end table. "It's 11:30, damn it." "Let me in. We'll talk." "Is it important?" "Just let me in. We'll talk." Jeff threw the blanket off, got his robe on, went to the door, and opened it. Lynette Meyer nodded, attempted a smile as if in greeting, which came out cockeyed, and said, "I gotta tell you folks that you gotta leave, and if you don't, then I guess you're gonna die, and so is your baby there." Jeff looked around at Amy. She was sitting up in the bed, had gathered Samantha in her arms, and was nursing her. She shrugged. Jeff looked back. Lynette was walking toward the registration area. He called after her, You're a sicko. You're a damn sicko, and don't think that Mr. Burge won't hear about this. Who are you, anyway?" She opened a door and went out into the night. History, November 15th, 1976. "I don't feel what I thought I'd feel," Anita said. She was standing at the house's front window. It overlooked the lake. The curtains were drawn, and she was holding one side open slightly. She went on, "I thought I'd be heartbroken after Dad died. I thought I'd cry." A brief pause. "I did cry, of course, but not much. Not as much as I thought I would." "It hasn't sunk in yet," Ben told her. He was seated nearby in a big green armchair. He was letting his head rest on the back of the chair. "You don't believe it yet." His tone was casual, designed to comfort her. "Of course I believe it, Ben." "Something inside you doesn't. That part that controls you doesn't." She sighed. "I don't know." "Yes, you do," he said. "Maybe I'm simply a cold woman." She glanced back at him. "That's possible. Maybe I never really loved my father. Maybe I'm glad he's dead." "No, you aren't." She looked out the window again. "The lake is very rough this afternoon, Ben." "Yes," he said. "Storm coming." "Oh," she said. "You loved your father, Anita." She nodded. "Yes, I did love him. You didn't." He shook his head, though she was still looking out the window. "That has no real bearing on anything, Anita. No real bearing at all." He was trying to tell us something. Ben looked at her. She looked at him. She repeated, "He was trying to tell us something. I know it. I can feel it." She looked out the window. "I could feel it when I saw him. When I saw him and said goodbye, I could feel that he was trying to tell us something." Ben sighed and let his head rest on the back of the chair again. "I won't tell you that it's fanciful, darling." "It isn't," she said calmly. There was a short pause, then he said, "Oh, headache." "Oh?" "Yes, bad one." "Me too," she said. A pause, then. "The sky's as black as a frying pan." Ben pushed himself to his feet. A pause, then sighed again. "I'm going to go lay down, darling." "Yes," she said. "I'll join you." He glanced about. "Where are the children?" "In bed. It's been a long 2 days for them, too." He went over to her, put his arms around her, kissed her forehead. "I love you. And in my own way, I loved your father, too." "That would be nice to believe, Ben." She kissed him. "Let's go upstairs." Chapter 17. The snow had stopped, and Arnaud had parked his Jeep sideways in the road, its headlights pointing at the shoulder. Manny Kent pulled his old Chevy Impala up next to Arnaud's Jeep, headlights also pointing at the shoulder. The deputy sheriff parked his car next to the Impala, flashers on and roof lights bathing the area intermittently in a harsh red glow. Arnaud stared into the dense, snow-covered pine forest that pushed nearly up to the road. He said to Mary, seated next to him, "I don't know. Maybe this is the spot, and maybe it isn't." Mary gave him a sympathetic look, but said nothing. There was a knock at Arnaud's window. He turned. The deputy sheriff was there. He was a stocky, blond man in his early 20s. He smiled often, apparently, Arnaud thought, in an effort to put people at ease. Arnaud rolled his window down. "Yes, sir?" "You're certain this is where Mr. Roman fell from the car, Mr. Burge?" "No," Arnaud answered. "You're not certain?" He smiled. "What's certain?" Arnaud said. "Best of the possibilities rising up tonight, this one is best." "Yes, sir," said the deputy, still smiling. opened Arnaud's door and continued, "Could you show me, please?" History, November 20th, 1976. Lucius Kellogg kept his eyes on the sky as he piloted his mail boat to the house on the island. As happened 2 or 3 times a month, he had a package to deliver to the Mosimans, along with the regular mail, and he looked upon that as a chance to set a spell, have a beer, chat with Mr. Mosiman, as contrary as the man could be. He was young, though, and he'd outgrow it. And watch Mrs. Mosiman simply because she was real nice to watch. Kellogg hoped the weather held long enough for that. The sky had been threatening to repeat the awful storm it had unleashed several days earlier, and if it did, then the middle of 7th Lake in his 12-foot mailboat was precisely the wrong place to be. He was a quarter mile from the house on the island when he said to himself that it looked odd today, that it seemed to be tilting slightly forward. He allowed immediately that this could not be, that what he was seeing was merely an illusion created by the choppy lake and the black sky that was the backdrop of the island, and by his new route to get there, necessitated by the fact of a new customer south of the Many Pines Inn, to whom he delivered first. It did not take him long to realize that the house was indeed tilting forward, toward the lake, and when he realized this, he felt a sense of satisfaction. Hadn't he warned Ben Mosiman more than once about the dangers of staying at that house? His view of the house showed him 4 windows in front, facing the lake, a door between the 2 bottom windows, it opened onto the dock, and the house's north wall. There were 5 tall, narrow windows in this wall, 3 on the first floor, 2 on the second. When he was 500 feet out, he saw a face appear at one of the second-floor windows. He waved. He could not tell for sure at that distance if he was seeing the face of a child, but he assumed that it was, because it was close to the bottom of the window frame. He got no reaction to his wave. The face stayed put. He guessed that its eyes were on him. He waved again, then held up the package he was delivering, a sizable Book of the Month Club shipment. Those people sure did a heck of a lot of reading, but that was okay. What else did they have to do out here? TV reception was awful because of the mountains, and they had no telephone either. So they read books. Heck, it could have been worse than that. They could have been axe murderers. The face in the window on the north side of the house slipped away. A minute later, Kellogg docked his boat, collected the Mosiman's mail, and climbed onto the dock. He glanced into their mailbox. Yes, the mail was still piling up in it. Odd that they hadn't collected it, he thought. Walt Roman was in no mood to thank his rescuers. He yelled at Arnaud, who, with the deputy, was helping him back to the road. "You bastard! You bastard! Now I'm going to sue you twice. You realize that, don't you? Once for those lousy stairs, and once for letting me ride in your damn defective truck. I've been thinking about this, and I'm duty-bound to warn you that your ass is in a sling." He moaned from pain and exhaustion and the first effects of hypothermia. Arnaud, who had Roman's right arm around his shoulders, while the deputy had Roman's left around his, they were carrying him under his legs, said nothing. The man was right, of course, Arnaud decided. The jeep was clearly defective. Otherwise, Roman wouldn't have fallen out into the dark and been breathless and in pain from the fall and therefore unable to call to him. Roman was right, and he, Arnaud, had much explaining to do. Roman regained some strength and started in on another harangue. "And I'll tell you this, too, you foreign nincompoop, after I'm done suing you for the damn stairs and the damn defective truck, then I'm going to sue you for leaving me here in these damn woods with the damn bears and the damn bobcats and all the other damn wild animals. What do you think of that?" "I'm sorry," said Arnaud, but Roman didn't hear him. I'm going to start at $10 million and work my way up from there. Do you understand what I'm saying? Have you got $10 million, buddy? I'll bet you don't. I'll bet you don't even have any damn insurance. Am I right? Am I right? I'm sorry, Arnaud repeated, struggling to keep the grip he had on the deputy's wrists under Roman's thighs. Forgive me. After you fell, how could I hear you in this snow, deep as elephants? Forgive me. The deputy smiled at Arnaud. Do you have insurance, Mr. Burge? Arnaud answered, smiling back, still straining to keep a grip on the deputy's wrists. I have insurance. Oodles. Oodles? 10 million bucks worth? Roman barked. Your misfortune is unworthy of a sum so magnificent, Arnaud said. What did you say? Roman was flabbergasted. He means your injuries aren't worth that much money, the deputy said, smiling. I understood what the hell the man was saying, Sheriff. I've had practice. Arnaud lost his grip on the deputy's wrist. The deputy caught Roman's left leg, the one with the bad knee, and Arnaud let go of his right altogether, so for several seconds it trailed backward on the snowy ground. Roman cursed. Arnaud grabbed the leg, hoisted it, got a grip again on the deputy's wrist. I'm sorry, he said. My hand became misdirected. Roman gave him a vicious smile. I'm wondering just what exactly I'm going to do once I've bulldozed that hotel of yours, Mr. Burge. Arnaud said nothing. They were at the police car. When Francis Carden was deep in thought, he liked to walk around Many Pines with his Swiss Army knife in hand, the slotted screwdriver, and Philip's head open. They opened at opposite ends of the knife and therefore were always at the ready, and unscrew whatever screws he could find. In the wing of the hotel that held his 3-room apartment, he had unscrewed practically everything and put it back together. Doors, cupboards, latches, table legs, though these only rarely. The rule was that a screw should be easy to get at. This simple physical activity helped him to think, gave him a point of focus, and tonight, the night that Arnaud was busy carrying Walt Roman around, the night that Amy and Jeff Glenn were still puzzling over Lynette Meyer's puzzling visit, Francis Carden was very troubled. He sensed something alien in the hotel and around it, something cloying and breathless and desperate. It gave him a sense of foreboding he disliked because he liked to believe he had been in intellectual control of his emotions for all of his 60 years, and that any sense of foreboding he had ever felt was in the same basket with devils and angels and people who claimed to know the future. This particular sense of foreboding, he was beginning to feel, announced to no more than the side effects of indigestion or loneliness. He stuck the Phillips head end of his Swiss Army knife into a screw in one of the hinges of a display case set into a wall not far from the hotel's registration office. The display case held tennis trophies won in the early 60s, when Many Pines had boasted its own tennis team. All the trophies were for first place, except one, which was for Sportsman of the Year. The award had gone to a man named Leland Foster Wood. As he unscrewed the Phillips screw, one of the 3 in the hinge, Carden kept his eye on that trophy. It was made of a very highly polished brass. He polished the trophies once a month, and he could see his face and much of the hallway behind him reflected in it. He thought about his face. He thought that it looked rounded and bizarre, reflected from the belly of the trophy, that his eyebrows were too thick, and that his chin was growing weak with age, that his eyes were the eyes of a man possessed, or obsessed, or acting under compulsion. Then he thought that it had probably once been a good and kind and handsome face, that it would be nice if he could remember such a face, though he couldn't. The photographs he had saved from his tour of duty in the Navy showed him a young man he was reluctant to admit had been himself, a young man who was beautiful and naive and vulnerable-looking, like an Irish setter. "Old Irish setter," he whispered as he bent over and unscrewed the screw and studied his reflection in the polished brass belly of the tennis trophy. He watched his lips move as he whispered. Their movements, too, were exaggerated by the roundness of the trophy, and it amused him. He stopped unscrewing the screw a moment, kept the screwdriver's tip in the slot, and said aloud to his reflection in the trophy, "What are you doing here?" He enjoyed the exaggerated movements of his lips, as if he were watching two caterpillars crawling on the pink and brass mask of his face. "Shit," he said. "I've got to grow a beard again. I'm good with a beard. It hides my chin. I don't like my chin." He said all this very slowly, his lips moving dramatically. He did not like looking into mirrors, for different reasons than Mitzi Roman didn't like looking into mirrors. But this, he decided, was not really a mirror. This was a movie he was watching, a movie of himself. He was watching his face become fat and his eyes become obsessed, and he was watching his lips move like two caterpillars. "You're an old fart," he said, and he remembered that years and years before he had realized he'd someday become an old fart, and he remembered thinking at the time that he hoped he would recognize it and cure it, and as he was remembering this, another reflection appeared in the polished brass belly of the trophy, and he didn't see it at first because he was studying himself. Then he did see it, and it frightened him, and he jerked erect. Jean Ward said to him, "It's very cold in my cabin, Mr. Carden." She looked confusedly at him. "What are you doing?" He shook his head, folded up his Swiss Army knife, and put it in his pocket. He was embarrassed. He didn't like being embarrassed. He saw it as an invasion of his privacy. "I'm unscrewing screws," he said. "I unscrew screws, then I screw them back in. Do you mind?" She shrugged. She was dressed in a blue pea-coat that was too large for her, and black rubber buckle boots that still had some snow clinging to them. "I don't mind," she said. "Where is Mr. Birch?" "I don't know," Carden answered. "Is he out?" It's possible he's out. You say your cabin's too cold?" She nodded. "Awfully cold. That fireplace heats up the area around it, and that's about all, and I think I'm out of fuel oil besides." "You want to switch? Switch rooms?" He nodded. "You can have any one you want, except the north wing isn't heated because the furnace is down." "Then how does the rest of the inn get heated?" she asked. He gave her a stiff, impatient smile. "We've got 4 furnaces, one for each wing. A place this big has got to have more than one furnace, right? If you have only one furnace, then the rooms that are the furthest from it are going to be cold, anyway, because the heated air cools off on its way down the heating duct. Do you understand that?" "Yes, I do." "Good. I thought you would." Jean raised an eyebrow. "Thanks. You said I could have any room I wanted?" "I said that." "Well, can I have one now?" "You can have one now, yes." "Are you always this brusque?" "No." "Oh, when are you not so brusque?" "I'm always brusque," he said. "Do you want another room or not?" She sighed. "Yes, I do. Can you get me a key?" She looked up and down the hallway. "Any one of these rooms is fine. I'm not fussy. I think the man in the cabin next to mine will be wanting a new room, too." "Oh? Who's that?" "I don't know. I don't know his name, anyway. We've talked. He's very nice, but he complains quite a lot about the cold." Carden nodded. "Don't we all?" Chapter 18. History. Lucius Kellogg remembered Catherine Mosiman as a mischievous, bright little girl, and as she looked up at him now from the back doorway of the house, He thought that it had been she who had been watching him from the second-floor window moments earlier. He said to her, "Are you all right, child?" Because she looked ghastly pale, and her expression was oddly flat. She did not answer. She held the door open so that it wouldn't swing shut on the heavy spring, and she stared wide-eyed at him as if, he supposed, he were someone she should be leery of. He indicated the big package he held under his arm and the fistful of mail he'd collected from the Mosiman's mailbox. "I got this stuff for your ma and your pa," he said. "They at home?" Still, she said nothing. She continued holding the door open, continued staring at him. "Can I come in?" he asked, and thought, looking closely at her, that her skin was so very pale that it was nearly translucent, and that her gray eyes were as expressionless as the eyes of a toad. He repeated, "Can I come in?" She moved out of the way. Her long yellow Sesame Street robe, it had a Kermit the Frog decal on it, hid the movements of her feet and gave him the uncomfortable feeling that her feet did not move at all. He stepped into the house, said, "Thanks," heard the door close behind him, and looked back. He saw that Catherine was still looking up at him, and he wondered, since she had not yet said anything, if she were able to speak. He remembered meeting her 3 months ago. He thought maybe it was even 4 months. And she had been chasing her brother Max around the dock then, had nearly knocked him into the water a couple of times, in fact. He remembered Ben Mosiman hollering at her to slow down, and he remembered that Catherine had barely acknowledged him. Kellogg said again, "Are you all right? Do you feel all right, Catherine?" She said nothing. He noticed an odd stuffiness in the house, as if the air were heavy and moist. He knew that lake houses often held such an atmosphere, but he thought that this was different, though he couldn't pinpoint why or how. Catherine moved past him then, past the refrigerator, toward the door to the hallway which led to the stairs. Again, as he watched her, Kellogg supposed that her Kermit the Frog robe was hiding the movements of her legs and feet. "Are you going to go get your folks?" he called to her, but she did not answer or look back, and in a moment had disappeared up the stairs to the second floor. Kellogg assumed that she was indeed going to get her parents, so he sat in a chair in the kitchen and he waited. Eventually, he saw that the sky visible through the kitchen windows had darkened considerably, and he remembered his concern about the storm. He got up from his chair, went to a window, peered out. "Damn it," he murmured. He'd have to give up the idea of having some coffee with Mr. Mosiman. The storm was almost here. He'd be lucky if he made it back to shore before it hit. He went into the living room, hesitated. Odd, he thought, but it had been some time since he'd heard any movement in the house. If Catherine had gone up to get her parents, then he would have heard them moving about, even if she'd interrupted them in a nap or in lovemaking. He shrugged. If there had been anything wrong, Catherine would have told him. "Mr. Mosiman," he called, "I left a package for you on your kitchen table." He waited. There was no answer. He went to the stairs, gazed up, saw the landing, a closed door beyond it. He listened. The house was very still, except for occasional shivers sent through it by a sudden wind. "Mr. Mosiman, are you all right, sir?" He saw the suggestion of movement to the left of the landing, where a hallway led to the house's back bedrooms. A moment later, Catherine reappeared. She was still in her yellow robe. She came to the top of the stairs. She stopped, looked down at him, her gray eyes very wide, as if she were surprised, or as if, he thought, she were on the verge of a scream. Kellogg said, "Good Lord, child, what in the name of heaven is wrong here?" She did not answer. She stayed very still, her eyes wide, her arms hanging loosely at her sides. "Answer me," Kellogg demanded. "You speak when you're spoken to." Her mouth opened very slightly, as mouths sometimes do in sleep. The house shook. A vicious tearing sound came from beneath it. Kellogg grabbed the newel post, felt himself going backward. The house steadied. "Child," he began, and looked up at the landing again. Catherine was not there. Kellogg was a tall, thin man, and strong, and he took the stairs quickly. He tried the door in front of him. It would not open. He tugged at it, certain there was someone behind it. He called, "Mr. and Mrs. Mosiman, you got trouble here. You got a shitload of trouble here." The house shook again, and he realized that for the past few seconds he had been leaning slightly forward to keep his balance. He started down the hallway to the back bedrooms. He moved slowly, as if uncertain of his footing. He saw that one of the bedroom doors was open. He went to it. He looked in. Ben and Anita were on the bed. Ben was on his side, with a heavy blue blanket midway up his bare chest. Anita was behind him, with her chest against his back, and her arm over his arm. Lucius Kellogg did not attempt to speak. It was clear enough that Ben and Anita Mosiman were dead. They were pale blue, their mouths open slightly, as Catherine's had been. Anita's eyes, he could not see Ben's because her forearm hid them, were halfway open, as if they were going to flutter and she was going to wake. And there was the smell, too, an awful, sickly, sweet smell, like potted meat left out in the sun. He backed away from the room, hand covering his nose and mouth. The house shook yet again. He realized that he was bending even farther forward to keep his balance. He saw movement out of the corner of his eye. He looked. Catherine was there, at the end of the hallway, in front of the closed far door. He took his hand briefly from his mouth and called to her, "Catherine, come here! Child, come here!" He covered his mouth again. Catherine did not move. He started for her slowly, smiling through his hand. He nodded as he smiled. He supposed that his nodding and smiling would take the place of soothing words. She smiled back. The red bow of her lips, which had before been slightly parted, broke into a broad and open-mouthed smile that he could not take his eyes off because it was a mouth that opened onto incredible darkness. He stopped moving toward her and realized that the same awful, sickly, sweet smell that had swept out of the room where Ben and Anita lay was also coming from within her. He knew what he was seeing, but he did not believe it. He thought that desperation and creeping panic had invented it. He thought that his brain was capable of any invention, that the child standing before him in her yellow Sesame Street robe with the Kermit the Frog decal was only a child in trouble, that the smell coming from her was merely the smell of the house, the smell of death that had gotten into her because she had lain down with her poor parents, weeping, confused. And now that smell pushed out of her pores the way garlic did, so he said to her in pity and compassion, "Catherine, I'm sorry. Your mother and your father are dead," he was about to say, but he did not say it because surely it was something she knew, and because it was something he did not want to tell her. He was too kind. He went on, "Where's your brother, child? Where's Max?" But she continued smiling at him, the red bow of her lips in a nearly perfect and impossible O, and her eyes as expressionless as a toad's, and her skin so translucent that he could see the hard knot of bone beneath. Then she screamed, and Ben and Anita screamed on their bed of death, and got up together and came out into the hallway. And Max got out of his bed and came out into the hallway too, and stood in his big bird pajamas beside Catherine. And Anita stood beside Ben, naked and blue and reeking of death. And they screamed. As the house began its long, slow slide into the lake, as Lucius Kellogg threw himself weeping out of that hallway and down the stairs and into the cold arms of the storm, they screamed. History. Lucius Kellogg's mind went numbly from one possibility to another, because surely he should be able to do something. He wasn't powerless, but all he could really do was watch the Mosiman's house, pushed by the storm, float out onto the lake. My God, there were people in that house, people who screamed. And so he thought that he could run into his mailboat and fire it up and pilot it to the house and peer into the top of one of those second-floor windows and call to the Mosimans that help had arrived and that they weren't doomed to go down with their house. And as he thought the scenario through, as he saw himself doing it, he revised it continuously, made minor corrections for errors in judgment, pulled the boat up parallel to the house instead of straight on, because that would make it easier, of course, for the Mosimans to climb in, headed directly into the waves so he wouldn't be swamped, and covered his mail with the tarp first, because an emergency was an emergency, certainly, but the U.S. mail was the U.S. mail. And when he thought that, he wondered just what kind of man he was. The lives of those people in the house were certainly a hell of a lot more important than someone's Sears catalogs, or a letter from their Uncle Herman, or even the long-awaited Social Security check. All those things could be replaced. Anything could be replaced except a person's life, especially the life of a young girl and her big brother. Poor innocent things, swept up in that misery, swept away by a freak storm, swept away by mud and water and filth, and by disease and by death. Poor screaming things, poor miserable things screaming at their own deaths, being grabbed at by death and screaming at it to go away. And he'd have to check his fuel level first. That was important. Be damned foolhardy to go out on that lake the way it was, with no fuel and not be able to power up into the waves, and be swamped and drowned like them, water filling their lungs up instead of air. "Hang on!" he decided to yell. "Hang on! It's floating!" He decided to yell, and realized at the same time that the storm was letting up, that it was dying, like they were in the house. "Hang on! The storm's dying!" he decided to yell. Then the water was over the top of the second-floor windows. Then, as quick as sound, and with a great gurgle from within the attic, the water was over the roof, and the house was gone. Lucius Kellogg smiled. The house and its people were gone. Thank the Lord. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of The Island. So until then, have a great week, everyone. This is your host, Ginger Winters. As a beekeeper, I know bees are generally friendly little critters until they're not. No matter how careful you are, sooner or later, you're gonna feel the sting. That's why I keep Bee Itch Stop close by. Made right here in Nevada with all natural ingredients, it soothes the burns, calms the swelling, and takes the itch right out. Safe for all ages and skin types. It works on mosquito bites, wasp stings, spider bites, and even cactus thorns and poison ivy. Whether you're tending hives or just enjoying the great outdoors, don't get caught without Bee Itch Stop. Get yours today.